Welcome to the Learner Center Collaborative podcast. I'm your host, Katie Martin, and today I am joined by Allie Wong. Welcome, Allie.
Thanks for having me, Katie.
So, you have such an amazing kind of history and career in project based learning, from being a student, teacher, leader, and now supporting districts around the country to really think about how to create more learner centered classrooms. So, we're super excited to dive in and learn about your journey today.
Thank you.
So, let's start from the beginning and share a little bit about who you are and some of the key experiences that have shaped you into the leader that you are today.
So I was born in San Diego, California,
Woo-hoo.
and both my parents are immigrants to this country, and they had this dream that I would be the first in our family to graduate from college. And I started out attending really traditional public schools in my neighborhood and emerged from eighth grade after attending these schools, a kid who was really unsure of themselves. I was extremely shy. I had struggled with friendships. I didn't know who I was, what my identity was. I would have never been considered anyone who was outgoing or a great public speaker or anything like that. My parents were actually a little bit worried about me just because I had such low confidence in myself.
Which is
By
so hard to believe now.
I know. But by chance, my mom met somebody who told her about a brand new charter school that had literally just opened in San Diego called High Tech High. And my parents talked about it and decided that it was going to really help me to go to a school with that was a smaller learning community that really focused on projects, that really focused on authentic learning, really bring me out of my shell. And at first, I didn't want to go. But it turns out my parents are really smart, and I have to give them a lot of credit for that decision that they made. Because by the time I had graduated as a senior from High Tech High, I had written and published several books. I had had an internship with Senator Dianne Feinstein in California. I had written plays and documentaries and worked to make blueprints for tiny houses. I'd done all these things that really turned me into a leader, someone with strong communication skills. And then again, my parents' main goal was a person with confidence in myself. And I really truly gained those skills because of the experiences that I had in high school, where I had teachers who believed in me, who knew me, who designed projects based on my strengths and interests. And I became an active participant in my own education through that high school experience.
I love that. And, there's so many parallels as you're talking about this, like the confidence, your ability to kind of learn how to learn and figure things out. And like just even watching you talk about your experience as a student, it feels like something you are super proud of and something that you have ownership of, which is not always true of students thinking back to their high school education.
I think the most special thing is I can clearly remember projects that I did and the impact that they had on me as a person. And I think there's very few people my age or even younger than my age who can remember something they learned in high school that had such an impact on them like 20 years later.
Yep. And, we're let's recording this on, March 14th, which is 5 years after the pandemic. And I'm having flashbacks to being in the high tech high schools 5 years ago, pre-pandemic, when my kids were students there. And although they were in elementary school, feeling that same kind of joy to think about, they were doing projects with their friends that they were really excited about. My son, got up in front of 100 people and read a poem that he wrote, which was never something he would have done years prior. Kids engaging in student-led conferences. And, it is that type of ownership and agency that is fostered, that is really a critical aspect of the high tech high system, but something that can happen in lots of different places. So
Definitely.
you then became a teacher. Tell us about your path to becoming a teacher and how that unfolded.
So I actually became a teacher because of a project that I did my sophomore year of high school, where I wrote and directed and produced a documentary comparing education in San Diego and education in Tijuana, Mexico. And it was truly that experience that really inspired me to want to work in education and specifically to work in education for equity. And so when I graduated from High Tech High, I went off to school to become a teacher. And I did teach in a couple of places before I came back to San Diego. I taught abroad in China. I taught in inner city Philadelphia for a year. And then I made my way back to San Diego, where I'm from, and started teaching. First, I actually taught sixth grade math and science at High Tech Middle. That was my first job here in San Diego. And then eventually I moved to High Tech Elementary when that school opened. And I taught there and became a school leader there too.
So cool. So we'll get into your school leadership, but as you became a teacher now, it's different, of course. You've experienced project-based learning, you've experienced the opportunity to really like have that agency as a learner and do projects that mattered to you. How did you translate that to becoming a teacher, and what were some of the things that were really important to you in your own classroom?
One thing that was really important to me was that my students had voice in the projects that they do. Because most of the projects that we embark on at High Tech High are semester long projects, they have to be things that students are willing to invest that much time in. And I remember being a student and feeling like some of the projects were right up my alley and things I was really passionate about. And then there was other projects that I didn't love as much and maybe like, weren't as connected to my strengths or interests. And so when I became a teacher, actually my first year teaching at High Tech Middle, I developed my own way of co-designing projects together with my students. And so actually the whole first month of school, I would spend with my students, not doing a project, but step by step designing a project from like nothing, like the whole building blocks of the entire project. We did it all together as a class. And it was me, my partner teacher, and then our 56 sixth graders. And together we built this project. And then we were able to actually do the project that we designed. And that experience, really showed me that when students are designers of their own learning, the dedication that comes out of that work is just so amazing and so powerful. I would have like visitors come to my classroom and be like, "Oh, like, well, what are kids doing for homework?" And at High Tech High, we don't really believe in homework. We don't really assign homework. And then a visitor asked my students, "Well, what do you do when you get home for fun, if you don't have homework?" And kids said, "Oh, like I like to work on my projects still at home." And that was like a theme of my classroom where like kids were so into the work that they were doing that like even on their own personal time, they were still learning about. One year we did a project on the end of the world and my kids were just like obsessed with the end of the world. It was 2012 and they were like still researching, could the world actually end, when they got home in the evenings. And I think it was just so powerful because my students had designed that project themselves. And I think sometimes when I say that, teachers are like, "But wait, like, how is that not total anarchy? And how do you make sure the kids are really learning?" Um, and I know you kind of know a little bit about my personality, Katie, but I'm a pretty planned and organized and structured person. And that's also how I was as a teacher. So just because it's a democratic classroom doesn't mean it's total anarchy, but it does mean that I provide structures for student voice to be just as important as teacher voice.
Yeah, I think that's an important point to like dig into a little bit, because a lot of times when people think about learner centered or project based learning, it's like, oh, you just let them do whatever they want. And it's absolutely not the case, right? High structure, high levels of accountability, clarity of milestones, right? And that, like, the importance of voice are all structures you can intentionally design for, rather than, designing what you're going to do every single day and telling you that be on this page. We're getting clear on the outcomes, and really providing that agency, and different pathways for students to get there, right?
Exactly. When I was co-designing projects with students, I would always start by asking students, what questions, concerns, and wonders do you have about the world? And they would brainstorm as many questions as they possibly could. We would use sticky notes. And so each student would have like 40 or 50 sticky notes in front of them. And then we were able to kind of categorize those questions. And then I supported them with making connections between their questions and our curriculum that we were supposed to be using for sixth grade. And that was the way that we taught, by connecting questions that they had to the content that we were learning.
Yeah, I think that's a really important distinction. It's not just a free for all. You're not addressing standards, or not really getting clear on what you're working on, but there's room for ways to personalize it and make it meaningful for students. And as a former middle school teacher myself, I always think about how powerful it was to design for my own students. I taught in a pretty typical traditional school system, but I also would co-design with my students which books they wanted to read, how they wanted to engage. We, wrote our own children's books, and they brought them over to the kids across the street to read them. And in a lot of places, kids think middle school's the worst part of their education, and we want to just skip through it. But it's such a important part. And I think you can see such a powerful sense of self develop and interest in education when you allow middle schoolers to be the crazy middle schoolers, young adolescents they are, instead of trying to overly control every second of their life.
Absolutely.
So, what else would you advise a teacher who's maybe just thinking, like, I want to try a project, I'm intrigued by this idea of co-designing with my students, but it still feels pretty big? Like, where would you advise someone to start?
I would just advise someone to try it and to know that it's going to be a little bit messy. It's also okay to start with a shorter project. Not every project has to be an entire semester long endeavor, but by connecting to questions that students genuinely have, by connecting to resources you have in the community or problems that students can solve in community, you're gonna see a change in the way that your students engage with the work that they're doing. Having an audience, a real audience for work beyond your teacher, is going to matter to students, going to teach them that they matter and the work that they do matters. And so that's where I would start, is thinking about what's a genuine problem in my community that my students could help to solve. And I would just try it out and test it out. Not every project has to be like collaboratively designed from start to finish. I will say that the process that I used took a lot of time. Like, it took us about the entire first month of school, and we dedicated probably an hour a day to just that design process. And some of that included like first month of school team building and culture building too, but it does take a long time to fully from scratch co-design a project with kids. But you can find other ways to give students opportunity to design pieces of their project, like their approach to solutions, the way that they present their solutions to a given problem. So I think start wherever you're comfortable, but just start.
Start and do something and learn from the process. And I think the piece of, like, asking students, sometimes we're so afraid to ask those that we're designing for, what is it that you want to try? They often have some really good ideas. It doesn't mean you have to do everything they say, but you can start taking in some of those ideas. As you were talking, I was thinking the projects are great to get kids excited about bigger ideas and think about that engagement. But we also, you're a math teacher, need to teach some concrete skills and ways of thinking. And I know that you expertly led and with some teachers around like cognitively guided instruction and some different ways of thinking about math. So maybe you could share a little bit more of what are some ways of working with students to help them think about the actual mathematical processes and getting them engaged not just in big projects but developing the technical skills that are necessary.
Yeah. So I love talking about math and I love talking about projects. And frankly, not every math standard is a good fit for a project. Some of them naturally are, like statistics or algebra or graphing, can usually be built into projects, but there's some math standards that are really important and foundational for students to learn, that not aren't necessarily great fits for projects. And I think the distinction is that math can always be taught in a learner-centered way, even if it's not in a project. And cognitively guided instruction, or CGI, is a really student-centered way to teach those really important math standards like number sense and all of the operations and fractions. And so I, along with a couple of other teachers at High Tech High, started an improvement group. And I was one of the co-leaders of that group. And our aim was to really change our math practices, which were a little bit traditional, even though we were High Tech High, to become a little bit more student centered. And I think, especially at the elementary level, by that time I was teaching elementary, our teachers just kind of had one way that they were taught to teach math, and they weren't exposed to CGI before. But we noticed some really, really positive changes once we started kind of digging into more learner-centered math practices. We actually started by having teachers reflect on their own math journey,
Mhm.
which at the elementary level, when you're not, a professor of mathematics, people have some different feelings about math and whether or not they felt successful. And so we actually started by thinking about, like, how can we change the narrative that there are math people and that they are not math people? And how can we help all of our students see themselves as mathematicians? And if we go from, with like that standard belief that every person can be a math person, kind of logically what follows from that is that students already possess innate knowledge about how to solve problems. It's about pulling that out, giving them situations so that they can use and apply those reasoning skills, and then be able to solve problems in ways that make sense to them. And so that's what CGI does. It's a way of like coming up with an interesting task that students are excited to grapple with, stepping back a little bit as the teacher and allowing that productive struggle to happen and just kind of noticing. And you're not coaching, you're not giving them a strategy during that time, you're just observing. You might be asking a lot of questions, but you're not giving any solutions ever. And then you're structuring a discourse, which is where like the real learning happens, because that's where you're able to like truly surface mathematical concepts, is through that discussion. But you're structuring those conversations by selecting key student strategies to share. And so you have students share in their own words, in their own way, how they approached a problem with the class. And then you're able to engage the class in a discussion around those solution strategies. And you're then able to make connections between strategies and come up with some conjectures about why certain things work, which eventually become our basis for mathematical knowledge.
And which, I mean, I love this strategy and this way of thinking, and you can translate it to so many different practices, right? This just approach, it doesn't require a new curriculum, it doesn't require a new building. It's really about like our way of seeing learners and being able to coach them as that guide. And for anyone who's listened to me for a long time, the connection that Allie and I made when she was telling me about her own background was that the teacher who literally shifted my own son's thinking about his abilities and his interest in his own schooling was coached by Allie. So I'm forever grateful for that opportunity because just what you said, it helped Zach see that like my ideas matter. I can struggle through something, and my teacher pulled out my strategy to share with the class, right? That thinking totally reframed his ability, his way of seeing himself as a learner and what he was capable of. And those strategies are something we can use all the time um, as we guide students. And I just am so grateful that you learned all about these strategies and taught more teachers who have really impacted not only Zach, but so many learners.
Thank you.
uh, so you then shift. So you have this experience as a student, you come back as a teacher, you can go from middle school to high school, and then become kind of a coach as well, coaching other educators, and eventually become the school director, school leader. So, talk a little bit about your transition from being an educator in the classroom to leading a school and really managing the not managing but supporting educators in their own practice.
Yeah, I kind of fell into it.
As
Um,
the best jobs happen.
as a lot of people do. Um, but I found a real true passion for supporting teachers who were the ones to make this magic with kids happen. And really, um, I like found a place serving the teachers that served our kids. And I really loved it. Um, we were a pretty brand new school. It was actually High Tech Elementary. I've never taught high school, but I love elementary students, and worked at High Tech Elementary as the dean of students and the director for a total of 5 years. So helping to support students and teachers and families in that community. I think one of my favorite things was being able to watch kids grow over long periods of time. It's different when you're a teacher and you just have kids for 1 year, but as a school leader, I had really deep relationship with kids from the time they were in kindergarten to the time they graduated from 5th grade, as well as their families. I think that was my favorite part.
What a cool role. And to hear you talk about your role as a school leader, as serving the students, the teachers, and the families, and the beauty in that. That's not always how maybe principals or school leaders see their role. So, what were some of the things that you did on a regular basis, or what are some of the ways that you worked with the staff to keep them excited and keep them supported in their role as project-based learning teachers?
I think I really saw myself as a teacher champion. The teaching is such a hard job. And so I was super, super protective of my teachers in terms of like anything that was going to make their job harder. Like I wanted to be the barrier first. Like, okay, go through me before you put something else like on a teacher's plate. And that was just kind of how I saw my role. Um, and so I think when I operated kind of with that mindset, it allowed my teachers the time and space to really be their best selves in the classroom. They had a lot of collaborative time with each other. We had a huge culture of collaboration across our schools, of course, in our grade level teams, but even across teams or with our exploratory classes, that I think was really magical when it came to planning and the types of projects that students were able to do. We also, again, had those improvement communities where we utilized improvement science and uh, plan do study act cycles, PDSA cycles, right? To really think about, okay, what is an improvement that we want to make? Like, how can we do that in a way that is manageable, that is feasible, that's going to have a high impact, and also a way that we can actually measure so that we know whether or not this change worked. And so that was a big piece of kind of the way that we learned and operated together. And then I really love just creating positive culture um, among staff. That was actually probably also one of my biggest challenges, just because as a staff we faced many different things over the course of my leadership. But it's also like the thing that I was the most proud of was the way that our staff was able to really bond together, like be a true community for one another. I think that the job of teaching is so hard. And if you don't have a best friend at the school where you work at, like it can be pretty miserable, but having people that you love to do hard work with together, like is what makes it truly a joy. And I think that I built a community that like just loved to be together.
Which is so important, and I love that. And I'm hearing you talk and I'm thinking just about the parallels around how you talked about your students being a middle school teacher and honoring their voice, honoring their ideas, and getting them excited about their work. There's that same through line as a school leader, understanding the teachers and protecting their time, but also it's not just go and do whatever you want, right? That there's like, we have a mission, we have common goals, we're going to collaborate toward those, and the improvement communities to really think about their own problems of practice, like towards those shared goals, help people continue to think about how to learn. And you're not doing it to them, you're really looking at the challenge and supporting them to solve their own problems, which is a total different mindset around leadership and leading people, than a typical I'm the leader, I know what to do, I'm just going to tell you, tell you your next step, which we know doesn't really empower people or get them excited about their work.
And also, like, I'm not a genius. I don't know everything. I don't have the answer to every little thing. I just think that that's so much pressure to put on one person. But when you realize that, like, collectively as a school team, we have so much more knowledge than any one person, right? No one needs to be the genius who has every answer. Together, we can be so powerful if we have a common mission and vision, and we have strategies that we can use to try to change and move towards common goals, even if we make mistakes along the way, right? We learn from those mistakes as a team and we just continue to grow and get better.
I love that, and so true. And the other thing that you said that stands out is the culture, you had to work towards it. I think sometimes it feels so well, it is invisible, and it just feels like this is just the culture we're stuck with. And your awareness of working towards it and designing a culture that really fostered that collaboration, that collective problem solving, and ultimately that collective efficacy is something that I think is the most important work of a leader. And if you're not attending to it, it can really derail everything.
Absolutely. And it was not an easy job. Actually, when I took over as principal, we had gone through two different, very recent, very tumultuous leadership changes. So when I first took over, we were not in a place of very positive culture. So it was a lot of work to build up to that and kind of create that kind of space that we all really wanted. But it took a lot of like very intentional effort on my part and on the part of the rest of our team too.
So many great lessons you have learned and demonstrated, and really shown what's possible, like, as a student, as a teacher, as a coach, and as a school leader throughout your career. You now work to support schools and districts, and as you were in high tech high, not every system is high tech high, and they have different ways of going about their work. What are some of the lessons that you carry with you that you think are important for school leaders to think about specifically as they're managing this change, whether it's from a more traditional system to one that is more learner centered, in both mindset and practice?
Mhm. I think the number one most common thing that I see that holds leaders back sometimes is this belief that somehow they have to get everyone on board and they have to get everyone to buy in before change can happen. And to me, that's just not true. And it's not ever going to be true, right? It's a myth that we could ever get 100% of people on board no matter what. It's just never going to happen. But change can still happen. So I think, like, the first thing is like letting go of everyone's got to be on board. Um, and then the other thing to let go of is that, like, as the leader, you have to do this by yourself. I feel like that kind of came through when I was talking about I didn't plan projects by myself. I didn't lead a school by myself. We don't have to create change by ourselves either. Like, as a leader, who are the people on your team that you can trust, that you can like empower, right? That you can engage with as co-collaborators in any kind of transformation. Like, those are the people that can help you with that change. Like, don't try to do it alone. One, it's not going to be very effective, and two, it's not going to be very joyful.
Sure. Well, and the way that you just said it, it's like the orientation when people don't move is I'm just going to focus on these people who don't want to move. And I'm going to spend all my energy on trying to get them to buy in when you're leaving the people alone or not supporting the people who are ready, who are doing amazing things, and just focusing your energy on those who are not, which is energy misplaced. And
Yeah.
it's not that we're saying you don't have to move, but we're just like we're focusing on moving and we're going to bring you along. And then that idea that you don't have to do it yourself. Yeah, focus your energy on those who are ready and who are excited, who you can lift up, but also, like you said, can bring others along. Because if you create that balanced team, you have different strengths and talents and perspectives that can help bring the whole team together.
And students can be part of that team too. I think one thing that every educator has in common, right, is a love for their students
Mhm.
above everything else. We don't always agree on the best strategies, but we all agree that we love our students. And so, one of the best ways to inspire change is when you have some teachers who are maybe doing projects or doing more learner centered strategies, and the students are super excited about the work that's happening in their classrooms. And so, maybe like Miss Katie is doing amazing learner centered strategies, and Miss Allie isn't yet. And my students are going to be talking to Miss Katie's students, and they're all going to be friends out at lunch. And so my students are going to come up to me and be like, Miss Allie, like, why can't we do what Miss Katie's class is doing, right? So they become part of our team too, because like these practices are what work for student learning.
Yeah.
And so I think once we show that advantage, the way that it can really be compatible with our vision and existing beliefs and mission, change will happen.
Absolutely. So many good ideas around and simple, tangible things, right? You don't, again, need a new building. You don't need a superintendent who says that, you have to make this change. As a school leader, there's opportunities to really lean in and bring your staff, your team, whatever it is, along. And like you said, if you're a teacher, bring in your students, whoever is closest you can connect with, and not do it alone. Who wants to do it alone? It's way more fun, like you said, to engage in this meaningful work with people that you really want to spend time with. So we've had lots of good conversations, lots of good insights from your experiences. I want to wrap up with some rapid fire questions. Just a few, but top of mind, whatever you think. First one is, what is one thing we should stop doing in education?
Being overly critical of ourselves.
I like it. What's one thing we should start doing?
Embracing mistakes.
So important. What's one thing we should keep doing?
Keep trying. Keep never giving up.
I love it. What is something that you are focusing on learning right now?
Well, being new to LTC, I'm really learning so much from watching the way that my new colleagues are engaging with different districts all over the country. And I feel like I've just been a sponge when it comes to seeing new strategies and ideas for change management and ways to support, especially like really big districts that I've never worked in before. So I feel like I'm learning a lot.
Awesome. And we get to learn a lot from you too. What's one thing that many people might not know about you?
I can play 4 instruments:
Wow,
piano, flute, guitar, and ukulele.
it's impressive. Very impressive. I can play none. Uh, do you have a favorite quote or saying that guides you?
It's really hard to pick one. Um,
You can come back to it.
yeah, I don't know if I have like a specific quote or saying, but I think what guides me um, is my Buddhist faith. So I'm Buddhist, and Buddhism is really a philosophy more than a religion, but it's really all about teaching and education. It's very connected. I would not be a teacher if it wasn't for that belief. And I think one of the like biggest kind of like goals of Buddhism is like, how do we become fully happy? But then how do we help others become happy? And to me, that's through the best education possible.
I love that. And you so embody that. So it's really cool to hear. Last two. What are you grateful for?
My friends, my family, and my dogs.
Lucky you. Last question, your hope for the future of education.
I really hope that students graduate from school kind of feeling the same way that I did, as someone who felt empowered as a leader over their own learning, who felt that their opinions and choices mattered, who felt that they, found where they belonged, and also felt that they had something positive to contribute to the world.
Allie, you are amazing. We are so grateful to have you on the team at LCC. And thank you for taking the time to share your experiences as a student, as an educator, and as a leader.
Thanks again for having me.